Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. It is wonderful to have such a big group here. We haven't had a big group like this in a long time. And I'm glad that people are finally getting out, and it's a great day. So we are very, very happy here to have a panel of people from West Concord. And the panel will be facilitated by Carolyn Bottum. Carolyn is from the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee, and this program is being funded by the Massachusetts Cultural Council. And Carolyn, can I have you introduce everybody? And I think this is going to be a great program, and again, I'm so happy to see everyone. Oh, and one more thing. We do have the program is being filmed by Minuteman Media Network, which is our cable TV. It will be edited, and then it will be on YouTube. And I will send everybody who has an email address here, I will send the link to YouTube. And if you don't get it, just contact me or Carolyn. Both of us will have it. Okay? Here you go, Carolyn. Oh, and one more thing. We're little. We have to use two mics, one for the camera and one for so you can hear us. So if it gets a little cumbersome, that's the reason. Sorry about that.
So thank you so much, Tina. As Tina mentioned, I'm from the West Concord Junction Cultural District Committee, and this program is part of a larger project about West Concord's industrial history, and we hope you'll take a look at the photo exhibit and also the mural that's down at 30 Beharrell Street, and those are all part of the project. So we're thrilled to be here, and we thank Tina and everybody at the Council on Aging, and we thank especially our 5 storytellers. These are 5 fabulous people who have stories to tell you about life in Old West Concord, stories you may not have heard anyplace else. So what we'll do is we'll have each of them speak for 8 minutes or so, and then we'll kind of throw it open a little bit. We do need to be done by 2, so we're going to move along pretty quickly. But let me just introduce our wonderful panel. We have Maynard Forbes, Mark Higgins, Meg Gaudet, Joe Soberg, and Nancy Ames. And I'm gonna hand one of the microphones to Maynard. There you go.
This obviously is a Now, point them to you, or I can talk into them, and I guess I better talk into them. Thank you. What a crowd. I have done a history on West Concord to a group not as big as this several times. And I am willing to come back and do that in greater detail than 8 minutes, because there's an awful lot of history in the boundaries of West Concord. This afternoon, I'm going to just deal with the name West Concord and how long it took to get to that point. And then, if I'm still within time, I'll tell you a little bit about the history of the West Concord 5 and 10. Most of you know that. But there are some interesting things that I'd like to talk about there. Up front, on this table here, there are some pictures of Old West Concord, some of the manufacturing, the Old West Concord School, the Hy-Vee Wheeler Center. There is a more current aerial photo of West Concord. It dates about 3 years ago, which is of interest. And then there are several small histories of West Concord. These are one-of-a-kind documents. I'm happy to have you look at them, but please don't take them. They're the only ones I have. If you see something you would like, let me know, and I'd be happy to reproduce them for you. West Concord. It took from 1654 or so to 1886 for the first indication of West Concord on a building or being spoken of. And it didn't become for real until 1928. There were three basic things that came together to make West Concord. Manufacturing, the railroads, and the prison. Each one of them had their effect on the final product, and it's still being changed every year, all the time. So stay tuned. Somebody 10 years from now will have a different take on that section of the history. Where did the name come from? Well, the second division was the western part of Concord that was settled in 1635. The second division was West Concord as we know it today, out to Acton and to Maynard. It was pretty barren land. It was pretty good agricultural land. And there were some streams and the Assabet River. And that's what allowed the manufacturing to take place. So we'll look at the area going west to start with. The second division brook, which is the brook that flows out of the pond up by the Muscataquid Club down into the Assabet, was instrumental in George Haywood getting started with a mill. As we come forward a little bit further, in the 1700s, there was a fulling mill at the location, general location, of where the Damon Mill is today. At that time, as it was developed, it became Westvale. You know Westvale Drive and the Westvale area. There was a Westvale post office, and that name has become ingrained in West Concord. The Damon name. Calvin Damon came here from Framingham in 1808 and purchased a little mill that had started at that location, expanded it, ran it till it burned in 1862, right to the ground. He had a son, Edward Carver Damon, who, with a relative, took over the land and built a replacement brick building. That's what you see right up on Main Street today. It has been expanded and continued. The history of the Damon Mill and who ran it, what it produced, and all of that is a study of longer than 8 minutes. The area became known as Damondale, and you know that from today. In 1844, the railroad came through. It was the first stop that it had in Concord was up close to the Damon Mill. They were moving product, and wool and cotton in, product out via the railroad. The next part of the railroad was the Framingham to Lowell line, which we now know as the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. It came in 1871 and formed the Junction. So we got Concord Junction. That name continued on for some period of time. But there was a fellow by the name of Warner who came in the 1850s and took over the lead pipe factory, which was in existence, and developed a pail factory. Everybody know where the pail factory bridge is? I see some nods, some nods. Well, Commonwealth Avenue, turn right by E&S, and you go over the pail factory bridge. Mr. Warner was quite an industrialist. He became well known in the town. He developed buildings for the people who worked for him in the pail factory, and later on was responsible for building houses out Commonwealth Avenue for the people who were involved with the prison. Mr. Warner really wanted the whole area to be known as Warnerville, and it was called Warnerville for a period of time. He wanted, when the town established the road from the railroad track up to the intersection of what is now Main and Church Street, he wanted that street to be named Warner Street. They went to the town meeting in that year, and there must have been a pretty hearty discussion, because at the end of the time, they decided that the street would be known as Church Street. By that time, Mr. Warner had been becoming a thorn in many people's side, and they were happy when that happened. Warner himself had established a Warner Hall, which, if you remember, or if you know where the dance studio is in the red building just across the railroad tracks, that was Warner Hall. It had both Warner's offices, etc. It had the first post office in that part of town. Westville had the first post office. And Mr. Conant brought the Bluine factory from Acton and established it in that building. Somehow, somewhere, a fire started in Mr. Warner's building and burned it down. He did, in fact, replace it, but it burned. That meant the relocation of the post office, the Bluine factory, which I haven't started to talk about, but the Bluine factory had come from Acton also. And at that point, it forced the Bluine people to build their own building, which was right across the street, and is now Minuteman Printing Building. Let's see if I can keep this thread going. I'm looking at the clock. You got a time? Okay. The first mention of West Concord, together with a building, was the West Concord School. Doesn't exist anymore. It was right next to this building where the daycare center is today. There are pictures up here on the table of the West Concord School. It was a grade school, and it was from 1886 to 1952. Not a fire, it was just taken down in preparation for the use of the Thoreau School. West Concord has come into being at that point. And Mr. Warner continued to expand. There were many small manufacturing entities that came into West Concord and expanded. And the housing that was necessary to keep those people in town and keep them happy, a lot of it was developed by Warner. The prison started in 1873 when the prison in Charlestown was being condemned, ready to fall down, needed a new one, and they found some cheap land in Concord. So they established the prison. It was good for a year. And then the people in Charlestown, where the prison had been, started clamoring that we need the prison back. We've got all these people that don't have anything to do, and we need it back. All but 100. In the dormitory, where they could learn a trade and go back out onto the population. One out of 10 may have come back during the time of the prison, but with that educational and job situation, they were able to get out and be a part of the community. It was a reformatory. Right, it was a reformatory. Right. Okay, let's see. How we got to West Concord? 1928, at a town meeting, they decided that rather than being Concord Junction or any of the other names, it would be West Concord. So it's been West Concord since 1928. And I've been happy to have been associated with it since 1951.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're getting a new microphone, but let's move it down to Mark, and maybe we'll just really
Mark the battery.
I'll try my best. Tough act to follow. My name's Mark Higgins. I grew up in West Concord. Lived in Maynard now 43 years. And a lot of people would call West Concord East Maynard, which did not make us too happy, but thank you. See if I could do that. I'm going to have to use my notes. I'm not as good as Maynard, but my mother, Dorothy, used to teach here and also at the Rowe School. She was from Tewksbury originally, and unbeknownst to me until my early teens, she had been married before. She married her high school sweetheart, Eddie Barry, from Lowell, and he got killed in World War II. My sister knew about it, but I did not. I don't know. Sis, we got to talk. But so she really loved teaching, and I think she finished up teaching here in 1983 and lived to 102. And my father, Barry, or his real name, John Joseph Higgins, he was a mailman in town for a long time. After World War II, he bounced around job to job, painting and doing whatever he could find. And then I found some papers that he had taken the civil service exam to be a corrections officer and passed. And I thought he made the right decision with the post office. But yeah, he lived to 74, but he loved the post office. Was diabetic, and it kind of did him in early. But let's see, that's a little bit about each. Want to talk about growing up in West Concord. We lived on Losbrook Road, 3 Losbrook, now 30. And it was a great place to grow up. We had the pond, we had the playground, there was skating, every sport you wanted to play at the playground. I remember Joe King down by the point would keep the cove cleared off for everybody, and sometimes there'd be 50 kids want to play in the game. And friend Meredith King was pretty good. I think if they had women's hockey back then, she may have been an Olympian. She was that good. But swimming lessons were there. Yuck to a lot of people, but we didn't mind too much. Neighbor Dave Wooden, who was a carpenter and a really nice guy, he put a beach in, I think 4 or 5 houses down by Warner Street, and made a dock and put it out on the pond, and anyone could go swimming there, and we had a blast. And yeah, that was fun. Had to watch out for the snapping turtles, the northern brown snakes, which we called water moccasins, and some talked about leeches, but I never got any leeches. Yeah, that was pretty gross. But and I recently found a prospectus for the Isle of Pines, which is Scout Island, and is very interesting. Back, I think around 1910 or so, there was a bridge built across, I think from near where the boat landing is, and they were planning to build 29 vacation homes on that island, which seems like a lot, but and going back to our house, my parents bought it from the West End Land Company in 1962, which I think purchased all of Ralph Warner's houses in the area. Let's see, back to the playground. It was a blast. Spend the whole summer over there. The instructors were great. There was just so much to do. I was trying to find information on the ice houses that used to be on the pond, but there's really not a lot of information or images about West Concord. It's really kind of sad. I have a picture, well, it's a copy of a picture that was with my father's things about a train accident that happened towards Acton on the Fitchburg line, and I knew nothing about it, so I just started looking into it, seeing what I could figure out, and through the Maynard Library, I got a card with the Boston Public Library, and I could look up any newspaper. It's incredible, the amount of information. So I found out it happened. When did it happen? I wrote it on there, but I don't think I wrote it on here. Oh well, it was in the 1890s, and the train derailed. There were a lot of train derailments in that area. I don't know if it was the tracks or what, but 200 cattle were killed in the accident, and the description there said that there were goats and all kinds of other animals roaming around the area, and people probably grabbing them, or I don't know. It must have been a wild scene. But I thought I would focus a little more on the railroads, because I started doing our family history, which I really didn't know a lot about, and also through the library on Ancestry.com. And I found that, well, I knew my grandfather, John G. Higgins, had worked for the B&M, and he moved out to California, I'm going to say late 40s, early 50s. and he wound up working for the Santa Fe Railroad out there. But I found out also on my grandmother's side, which was the Waterman family, which I didn't know, or maybe I did and I forgot. That happens when you're my age. But found out that my great-great-grandfather also worked for the B&M. I think he was out of Biddeford, Maine area. And I found an article where he had gotten killed walking on the tracks in the East Somerville train depot. Like, he was an engineer for, I don't know, 40 years or something. And it was pretty shocking. And it said there were 600 railroad men attended his funeral in Boston. And the thing that really stuck out to me was that he lived for 2 weeks, and his supervisor stayed with him the whole 2 weeks, just stayed day and night at the hospital with him. But the injuries did him in. And also, his name was Charles Waterman, Charles W., and he had a younger brother who also worked for the B&M and later became an engineer. And I believe his son was involved in a theft ring on the railroads, which I've just started to research, but I'm sure that didn't make Dad too happy. But I'm reading a book now called Death Road to Rails, because I've been interested in the railroad, family history. And back in the 1800s, early 1900s, it was so dangerous. In a 30-year period from 1882 to 1912, 48% of all deaths in the country were railroad related, whether accident or walking the tracks, and the next closest was typhoid fever, 7% of the deaths. So that tells you how dangerous it was back then. Bridges and collisions, derailments, it was just horrible. But I guess they learned from their mistakes. How am I doing on time? Yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, wanted to mention one more thing. I know some of you know about the Facebook site, West Concord, Mass. It's real life. If you'd like to join and do Facebook, come on in, because, there's a lot of old information shared by an old guy. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Meg.
Hi, everybody. I'm probably going to tell you a lot that you already know, but on the chance I'm not, give you a little history about this building you're sitting in. So before this was built, there was, as Maynard said, a school called the West Concord School. My understanding, it was a very large square wooden structure that wasn't as sound as it could have been, mostly because it was overcrowded. They would have multiple classes in one room, which caused a lot of distraction. So the answer to what Concord had was Peter Buckley became Harvey Wheeler. So in 1917, they put a committee together to look for a place to have the school. And you're sitting, again, in Harvey Wheeler. This land was donated by Mr. Warner, who gave the land for $1, on the condition that it always have a school on this property. So there is a deed restriction on this property. So in 1918, when they finally cut the ribbon and opened the doors, there was a lot to be said about this building. It's called Spanish Revival. It's the first school to have exterior doors in each of the classrooms. And that was to ensure that kids could get out in case of a fire. The boiler room was secured by all kinds of protective things they didn't do prior to that. So again, like the railroad, they learned a lot in construction. The superintendent actually wrote in his report that this was the jewel of Concord. It's the first time that West Concord actually had something new, something that was a little bit better than Concord Center. And I can say that because I actually grew up on the other side of Route 2, but I have a lot of memories because as a kid, I went to school, started off at Willard, and then kindergarten or first grade, then we were redistricted to go to Thoreau. And I remember going on the bus, driving by what's now you guys will probably confirm this. The West Concord Pharmacy and 7-Eleven used to be Derby Farm. Concord Green was a big white house up on a hill, and it was the COA farm. And the 99, now the West Village, was actually a Chinese restaurant called Konakai. So those are what I remember about West Concord. But I also know that Harvey Wheeler became a satellite for Thoreau School because we had a huge amount of kids back then. In fact, the graduating class that I was in, and I'm not going to tell you the year, was so big, it broke the records. Over 575 kids graduated from Concord Carlisle the year I graduated. And Harvey Wheeler served as a kindergarten, first grade satellite to Thoreau School, and Jim McMullen was the principal for both, and he would have to go back and forth. So there's a lot of fun things about West Concord, but getting back to the school, this was just one of the nicest things. It's 105 years old. How many schools in Concord can say that? It had the roof repaired once or twice, but this building is fundamentally the same. This first time they had a stage. It's the first time they had a cafeteria. Before that, kids would eat in the classroom. So it was technically cutting edge for 1918. And I know a little bit about this because my grandfather was the foreman for a company called Perkins and Wells, and they're the ones that built this school. So that was Dick Flynn, my mother's father. My name changes, and all the women, their names changes, so it's hard to trace us sometimes. The name Harvey Wheeler came because there was this big debate on whether they could afford to have a clock tower. They had run out of money, even though it wasn't, in the end, they ended up giving money back. But Mr. Wheeler, who was also the owner of the harness shop in Concord, and he was president of the Middlesex Bank, he donated the money, and as an honor, going back to him, they named the school after him. I'm trying to think of some of you guys mentioned, for instance, the prison. I noticed in my notes, in 1878, when they built the reformatory, Mr. D, it was Cook's Farm before that. It was a dairy farm, I find that fascinating. I didn't know those things. Also, before they even had the West Concord School, they had little villages, as Mr. Forbes mentioned. There was Warnerville from the Pail Factory. There was Damondale, was also one of them. And there was the reformatory, was also different pockets. And each of those pockets had little tiny house schools, little schoolhouses, just small ones, again, crowded. Then they went to the school that was on this property, and eventually they went to Harvey Wheeler, again, which is still standing, which is, again, something to be said for our schools today. I speak briefly, so I'm trying to think if there's anything, some of the other things that you said about the railroads. Back over by 7-Eleven where the train crossing was, it's been shifted a little bit, thanks to Dory Keogh. I see you in the eye there. But anyways, there was over 125 trains would pass through here. And again, it led to the Industrial Revolution, which also put West Concord on the map. They were the first post office to have uniforms because they produced so much mail due to the Industrial Revolution, which is, another wonderful thing. And when I was growing up, West Concord had its own zip code. It was separate then, Concord. And eventually it morphed.
Anyone?
You know it? So what I'd like to do is pass the microphone, and then if you guys have any questions about Harvey Wheeler and I can answer them, I'd be happy to do that.
Now we'll
Sorry.
hear from Joe.
Grew up in West Concord, moved to Acton, been up there for about, 42 years. But my dad and his partner, Ted Edwardson, opened up E&S Mobile Service, which started out at Baker Avenue, where the TD Bank is, and then they moved to the location where we're at now in 68. Me and my brother, Bill, bought it in 78, haven't left since. So, but I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the gas stations that were around. Looking back, in West Concord, when I was growing up, there was 10, but there was 2 of them that were a little bit ahead of my time. So anyway, now there's, I think there's 4 in West Concord. So in Concord Center at the same time, there was 10 also, a lot down in by Thoreau Street. And I keep thinking that, back then, there wasn't half the vehicles that there are now, and there's a lot less service stations around. So, and then I was thinking too, when I first started pumping gas when I was about 13, I think it was probably 20 cents a gallon compared to what it is today. So things have really changed. I don't know what else to say. The other thing I was thinking of too with West Concord is there was 4 supermarkets also. There was Mandrioli's, Prendergast Market, Dominic's Market, and then there was a 4th one, I think it was Perkins Market. And I remember when I was a kid, we used to go down to Dominic's Market because Dominic's always had ground beef. And you'd go in there and you'd go, and if you needed a pound of ground beef, you'd run it through the hand grinder and grind up a pound for you. So that was a memory that I remember. So anyway, well, that was late, but that was Concord.
Remember
So-
the great canoe race?
The great race, it went from, it was in Boston, went from Cambridge up to Marblehead. Well, me and my brother and our 6 other guys, we did that a number of years. But,
But you had it in Concord.
oh, we had that one too down to,
Yeah, down the Concord River.
down the Concord River. It was, the great race down the Concord River that ended up at the old North Bridge. So, but anyway, I don't have a lot to say, so we'll pass it along.
Now we'll hear from Nancy.
Well, I live in Acton. I've never lived in Concord, but I worked in West Concord for 11 years at the leather shop, which is where the Neshoba Bakery is. That whole complex became a belt factory, and they had salespeople in New York who were very strange people. Not real nice. Your typical New York salesperson. So Merrill Weinbrod started the leather shop. He lived in Concord, and he made leather belts, I think, in his house. And then he got the top floor of one of those old wooden factory buildings on Beharo Street. And I remember we were standing around, and one person was stitching because they'd moved everything out, and they were waiting for this person to finish that belt, I guess. And then they scooped up that machine and they moved it over to the top floor of the Neshoba Bakery building. So we started off with the top floor, eventually took over the second floor, and then the building in the back, and then where Pottinger's soap is, that whole wing was the design room and all the leather and samples to make belts with. I remember the stitching area ended up being over a plastics factory sort of thing that moved in underneath before we got the bottom floor. And people started, well, one first person fell off their chair because one of their machines started burning plastic. So we were all getting high. Didn't know why. Finally figured it out, got him to shut off that machine. What to say? Well, we also got a lot of the boat people. That's how we knew them. We didn't know them as refugees or immigrants. They were called boat people, and they were people from Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam that were fleeing from that area. And they ended up at the leather shop, and they were great people. They ended up being able to first buy cars and then buy houses because they would take home work. There were belts that you could do at home with a pair of pliers, cinch belts. And they'd take them home, and the whole family would stay up all night working. It would take us all week to do one box, and they'd do it in one night. And that's what they did. They bought their cars first, and then they went and bought houses. And we're just, they were so hardworking, and they were a lot of fun. They had great sense of humor. What was really cool was you'd see the men and the women they'd hold hands as they were walking, or sit and put their arms around each other. That's kind of a cool memory. We had boat races. You know, the stream behind that building. We'd start, we had to hand make these boats out of anything and drop them off from the bridge and have them go behind the building, and somebody was in a canoe in the stream to pick them up. And one of the people, Evelyn, who worked in the design department, made a duck out of white patent leather, and she even had an orange beak. And she dropped it into the water along with some others in her heat. And all of a sudden, this golden retriever comes out of nowhere and jumps in the water and chases the duck down the stream. We were trying to run on the other side, but it wasn't easy, and we were laughing so hard we couldn't even breathe. We got the duck away from him. I don't know if she won. I can't remember that. I have down there a couple of catalogs. I drew the belt styles because there were no computers then. It was Xerox machines. So I think those are from 1980s. And I was a stitcher, and then I became a supervisor of the inventory area, and then ended up in the design department working for some designers. I left before the demise of the leather shop. What happened was everybody was sending work overseas. It was too expensive to manufacture it here, and I think they just got down to a design room, and then I don't know what happened.
So we have about 15 minutes. Does anyone have questions? Okay, so my husband Peter is going to run around with a microphone, and then we will use that one to answer questions. So, who had a question?
Thank you. Does anyone know what happened to the Cambodian and Vietnamese people who worked there? Because I don't see a lot of them right now in this area.
I think they moved out of the area. Because some bought houses, small houses around in West Concord, but I don't know how many actually lived in West Concord when they worked at the leather shop. So I don't know if they came from the city out. I have no idea.
Bought the potting shed on Bradford Street. They lived in, for the most part, in Lowell, but a lot of them went to the potting shed and worked for Rob.
Next question?
I'd like to hear from the panel about your memories of the blizzard of '78.
Okay. I do.
Who wants to hear about the Blizzard of '78 and the piano?
I had to walk to work because my manager lived above me. And she came down and knocked on the door and said, "Let's go to work." So we had to walk down the road to get to work. And Merrill had tried driving and got stopped like 2 or 3 times by the police. And he got to the leather shop, and he had to send us all home because the police were after him. They didn't want anybody out on the road, so we got paid for coming to work.
I remember I had moved out of my parents' house 1 week before the blizzard, but it was only about a quarter mile away on Main Street into Chris Shagness' house with 3 other young men that I knew. And at the time I was working at Digital in Maynard, and it was crazy. You couldn't go to work. They paid us for the 2 weeks. And I had an old Mercury snowmobile then, but it wasn't really a good one. So would just walk down to mom and dad's and shovel them out because mom being Scottish, we never had a snowblower.
I do want to say we walked from South Acton to West Concord.
I just remember plowing, and I remember going down to the Rotary and going up Barrett's Mill Road. And as we were plowing, because of the wind that whipped across those fields, the wind was, the snow was going up all the way over the truck because the snow bankings were so high on both sides. It was like trying to drive through a tunnel. It was unbelievable. Yeah, that was a crazy time.
Any more questions?
I'd like to thank all the panelists. This is a place where there's a tremendous amount of memories and love. And I always feel that when I walk through West Concord. And I wanted to mention that there are 2 plaques. One plaque is for Barry Higgins, your father, and the other is for your father, John Forbes. And I would like to ask about the origin of those plaques. Or if you remember when they happened, or anything about them, or your father's.
If you're talking about the sign over the gate between the 2 buildings, that originated by your next door neighbor. Who was your next? Bruce Caldwell. Bruce Caldwell came to me one day and said, I want to put up a sign for John Forbes. Bruce had worked a little bit, knew my father all along because the Caldwells lived on the 3rd floor of the 5 and 10 building when my father bought it. And as he bought it, some of them were out of the house at that point and were off on their own. Bruce, I think, was one of them. He just wanted to memorialize my father. And I think that's the same with Barry. And I hope that I know that the current owners of the 2 buildings know the background of the sign, and it will stay there.
I don't really recall who was behind putting the plaque there, but it could have been the Junction committee. I don't remember off the top of my head. I forgot to mention, I think that my mother was honored citizen in 2007, and she would tell me, your father should have won it, and I'm not saying anymore.
Who else has a question? In the back there?
I'm a West Concord girl, went to the school, met Jack Condon, who stood on, not that stage, but the first one, and sang Danny Boy. And now I'm with him after all these years. I love West Concord, and I know people who came today certainly must love West Concord. My proposal is, and my challenge, is we need a museum for West Concord, saving all these memories. And many of you are probably throwing out things from your house or your businesses that represent West Concord, and I want to save them. Maynard Forbes was generous enough to give me to store the toy bin from the 5 and 10, which everybody who ever lived in West Concord and from all around loved. And to me, that is the symbol of West Concord. And now we need something where to put it and what to put in it and what goes around it. I'm a Carter relative, Winifred and Robert Carter from Carter Furniture Company. And Jack is Jack Condon from Concord Packaging, Condon's Packaging Store. And I have some things from each of those. I have a lot of photographs and things from Bob Carter. But when I cleaned out his estate, cleaned out his house and his store, no artifacts left from those, and it broke my heart. So when the West Concord 5 and 10 closed, I said, we have to save anybody who's left who has anything that goes to West Concord, belongs to this museum, and you need to start it. And I'm hoping that somebody here will take the ball. I don't live in Concord anymore, and I'm awful aged, old, and I can't write. And so please, somebody step forward and take over and carry this through. Some spot, even in here, a little place where that toy bin can sit. And John Forbes's photograph can go, and Dot and Barry Higgins' photographs can go, Robert Carter and his father, and all of the people who were here, Mr. D over there, Bill D, and all the good stories that go with this, because there's so much that West Concord should be as celebrated as Concord. And growing up as a little kid in this town, I always felt that. This town is special. They had a battle on the bridge, and they had a few great writers. That's it. Why, come on, where's West Concord? So that's my 2 cents.
I just wanted to say, as far as photographs and all that, maybe the Concord Library Special Collections, I've donated materials to them so that, people can see them. And it's a good place for the history of the town. And they really don't have a lot from West Concord. So like you said, I would urge people, if you have anything that would be of that type of value, to maybe think of the special collections at the Concord Library.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody realizes it, but West Concord actually has a historic district. Dory Keogh, Joanne Gibson, and myself kind of went this charge when they were closing Our Lady's. So it was one way to preserve this one section. So the Fowler Library, Harvey Wheeler, and Our Lady's Church is all part of the only West Concord historic district. The other thing I wanted to say, I forgot to mention, was in 1975, the school committee voted this building surplus, and it was slated for demolition. And luckily, a group of citizens got together and proved its worth. And here we are sitting in this wonderful facility that has served us many, many times over and over since 1975. So thank you to the ad hoc groups who do see the value.
I just wanted to say I'm back at that building again because I found Margot Kimball's art studio. She's turned it into a community art studio. And so I've worked along with a whole community of people on at least 3 murals about West Concord. One was farms, one was the industry, and music. And they're all hanging up outside around West Concord. And we're working on a 3rd one about the rail trail and the surrounding towns. And if you want to come help on some of those, paint some of those murals, get on Margot Kimball's email list for when she has projects. I also want to say I remember Maynard when the skunk died under the 5 and 10.
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Thank you.
Oh, we have a question over here, and then 2 over there, and then I think we'll be out of time.
Maynard said he had some history about the West Concord 5 and 10. I'd like to hear about that.
I've got 2 minutes to do it all. The West Concord 5 and 10 started in 1935 across the street from its last location. It was started by Pasquale Mealy, who lived on Maple Street. He also had a similar business down in Newton. He ran the business in Newton. His wife and sister-in-law, I think, ran the business in West Concord. After the war, 1946 or 7, he moved the business from the corner of Harold Street, Bradford Street, to the location of Walden Sandwich Shop today. In a year or so, he expanded it into the next section of Deborah's. And in 1951, my father was looking for a new business. He had sold a grocery store in Winthrop and wanted to get out of the grocery business and do something different. He bought the business at the sandwich shop, worked there for 7 years, and in 1958 bought the building he bought the building that it ended up in. I will come to that in a minute. He moved the business down there in June of 1959. 1968 and 69, he added the back room to the building and squared the building off. And I came back out of the Army in 1982. He died in 91. I carried the torch until 1982. And to 2000, 1982, to 2020. And that enough? I can flesh it out more, but there are all kinds of stories about the basement of the 5 and 10. It was a great place. It was the same size as the store floor and the back room floor. And it held a lot of merchandise. Just a minute, I'll check downstairs and see if I can find it. And that's how it worked for a number of years. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. There were enough indications as time was moving on that the suppliers that made it really interesting were going. And the body was telling me that 6 days a week wasn't going to happen very much longer. That's the story.
And the other story is, if you couldn't find something at the 5 and 10, you asked, and somebody would find it. They had everything. They all had everything.
So I think we had 2 questions back there, and we'll just take those 2 questions, and then I think we're out of time.
Hi, I just want to say that, Meg was talking about how this building was saved here. And I know that there's been things going on in town about the dam on Warner's Pond, how perhaps they want to take it down or perhaps leave it or dredge the pond. And really all I'm doing is saying, that's I think a big part of West Concord. And it's something for people to think about and be aware of. And if you have any feelings on it, then I guess be supportive about it. It's another West Concord treasure that we would like to keep. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, my name is Richard Lloyd. I grew up in West Concord. I still live here. I was interested in Meg talking about the Harvey Wheeler and the great days of coming to school here. But they weren't always fun and games. There was a lot of very unpleasant moments for me. Now, I had 2 older sisters that graduated from Harvey Wheeler. Whenever I'd act up before kindergarten, they'd always say, "Wait till you get to Harvey Wheeler." And Mrs. McCone and Mrs. Fisk and Mrs. So-and-so get a hold of you, they'll straighten you up. So 1 year later, my mother dragged me down Commonwealth Avenue, brought me at that end in the kindergarten. It wasn't long before I realized what they were talking about. First thing that happened was a loud screech siren, meaning drop all your toys, drop your tools, line up, get down. We're going to the basement. They brought us to the basement, didn't tell us what was going on, put our knees between our legs, sit on the tunnel floor, saying we're going to be bombed. What? Jack Condon, my friend, sitting next to me with his head between his legs, humming God Bless America. I said to myself, get me out of here. So anyway, there were some thrilling moments during that time, but it was a great, great school to go to. And we did walk across the gravel yard out back to the West Concord Harvey Wheeler School, 7 and 8, and then we went on to Concord High School. But that was a little bit about West Concord Harvey Wheeler. Every time my neurosis kicks up, I blame it on Harvey Wheeler.
So we actually had one more over there.
I could go on forever because I look around and I see older faces that I grew up with. You're still beautiful, Judith. Judy Bowering's house, right to my mouth. Judy Bowering's house was right across the street, and my aunt's was next to her, and her uncle's cottage furniture was there. Tomorrow I'm taking 2 chairs to be repaired that my parents bought from Robert Carter a million years ago. But next to the Bowering's big house, the house in the corner, is where the single female teachers used to live. Miss McCone's for kindergarten class was down here, but she was a Concord McCone, so she had a house to live in. But next to the Bowerings, Miss Fisk used to live there, Miss Dyer. Yeah. Yes. Mrs. Wickham before she became Mrs. Wickham. Yes. Oh, I didn't know that. I thought they were single women. Where would a single woman find a place to rent in Concord on the teacher's salary? And we had Mrs. Mulcahy, and who taught everybody, 2 or 3 generations. And when she retired, she had to sell her summer house at Camden to pay for her taxes and fuel in Concord. And Condos, the liquor store, as we would walk down the stairs here, Chuck, was there a grocery store where they lived upstairs there? Did we buy candy and ice cream there? Yes. Yeah. Did they have a counter? Yeah. Was it a counter at the spa? Ice cream? Oh. That's right. Or to his shop. I could go down to my family's Pendergast's meat store. But the most fun in West Concord was the 5 and dime.
Oh.
5 and dime. We could spend our allowance and buy presents for everybody. And again, like she said, if you couldn't find something, his father would say, give me a few minutes. He'd go down to the cellar and he'd come up with it. I missed the 5 and dime.
Okay.
I'll shut up, but I could go on forever.
Yeah. So we're actually already over time, but we'll do one more really quick question. A lightning round question, as someone says.
I was interested in knowing more about the clock tower. You said there was some controversy with that Harvey Wheeler, did he pay for that, or just how did that occur?
Going by the 1918 town report, it mentions that the town was on the fence about spending money on a clock tower. So it was a benefactor, Mr. Wheeler, who actually was the president of the harness company. He donated the money.
Okay, because if you were to go to Sapporo, Japan, you would see almost a replica of that tower that was built by William Wheeler, Harvey Wheeler's brother. So when my husband and I were part of the Concord Nanai network, and we used to chaperone 100 or so band students to Nanai, Japan, and we'd always visit Sapporo to see the museum they have there with a lot of the artifacts of William Wheeler. He was one of the head teachers and eventually became president of Sapporo University, which is now Hokkaido University. And we had a 4-day discussion where people came and learned about Harvey Wheeler in Concord, William Wheeler in Japan. And we put out photographs of the clock tower here and photographs of the clock tower at the University of Sapporo, which is now Hokkaido. So I just thought that would be interesting.
That's
So
great
if you go to Japan, check out the tower.
Okay, so I think we've truly run out of time now. So I wanted to thank our wonderful panelists. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to the COAs. So thanks so much.